Welcome to Behind Every Employer, where leaders in business and education from across the country share solutions for sourcing, training, and growing frontline talent to create the workforce of tomorrow. This broadcast is brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education. To learn more, check us out at www.coabe.org or any of your favorite podcast sites. Now, here are your hosts, Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. Hello there, Anson Green. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Jeff?
Good.
On,
Another episode. I'm looking forward to this one. I've been waiting all day.
I know. I've been waiting for a couple of weeks as we got this thing prepared, because this is going to be a great episode that kind of gets us into some topics we haven't talked about in a while. So I'm real excited about it, and some really outstanding organizations. And probably the most important aspect of it is there's going to be a lot of focus on the great state of Texas. So I think that's going to be a nice little ad for our listeners out there. But I'm ready to get into it. We got to get these folks in here because they're got some great stuff to share on a project it's a project that's coming out, so it's going to be something that I think the audience could be like being able to see the podcast and then hear the press release and see what's going on out there.
I love it. I feel like the New York Times ready to pop a story. This is awesome.
That's right. That's right. Breaking news. So let's start with introductions on this great team. So we got Haley Glover and Jenny Achilles here. One from the Trellis Foundation and the other from Aspen Institute. And I really want to just have you guys introduce yourselves, talk about your organizations. They may be new to some of our listeners, and really about the missions that you guys are on. Jenny, go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you, Anson and Jeffrey, for having us. We are so excited to talk about this work and be able to share it with a national audience before it even kicks off. So thank you so much for having us. My name is Jenny Achilles, as you said, and I am the Senior Program Officer at Trellis Foundation. And we are located in Austin, Texas, but we serve the entire state of Texas. And our mission is improving post-secondary attainment for low-income students and students of color in Texas. So we just focus on post-secondary completion and just in Texas. And there's 3 focus areas that I want to highlight. So we look at holistic student needs, streamlining pathways. And for us, that includes that transfer among institutions, the high school to college transfer, the college to workforce, workforce to college, all of those different avenues of pathways that students go through. And we also have a 3rd focus area of reconnecting learners. And that's how we really highlight, and y'all will absolutely understand this, how post-secondary education includes so much more and so much more diversity of modern learners beyond recent high school graduates, right? So it includes returning adults, for us also incarcerated individuals and disconnected youth are priority populations.
Well, fantastic. It's such an important space in Texas. I used to work at a community college, several community colleges actually, and at the Workforce Commission. And, that higher ed space is such a precious space for us to fuel our employer community. I mean, Texas economically has been growing for decades, and we've got to make sure we're sourcing that future workforce. So we really appreciate the work you're doing. Haley, let's get into what's going on over at Aspen. How did you guys meet? What is this project all about? Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but tell us more about you and Aspen Institute.
Oh, I'm excited too. And I've actually known Jenny for years because we were funders together in the very small philanthropic universe of higher education funders. But now I run a program at the Aspen Institute called UpSkill America. We're a part of the Economic Opportunities Program, and we focus really squarely on, 1, employer-driven education in all of its forms. So whether it's tuition benefits to apprenticeship to internal training and everything in between. 2, the organizations and entities that support employers to help people acquire education, colleges, universities, training providers, etc. And then we put learners at the middle of everything, because oftentimes, when employers are investing in education, it is because they're not, folks aren't getting education elsewhere, or because they need to acquire skills in a certain way, or they need guidance to get to a certain place. And so we try to identify solutions that work for all 3 of those, and we try to live into this idea that employers can do well while doing good. And so we're excited to be partnering up with Trellis to deliver this new project that we're talking about today.
All right, fantastic. Well, tell us about it.
Yeah,
This it's streamlining success. Do I got the name right? Yeah.
that's right.
Uh,
That's right.
I love it, and I want to hear more about that because those are two things that I'm always aiming for myself. But I want to hear more about your project.
Right. So we're real excited about this project because it does, I mean, it's doing a couple things. One, as Jenny mentioned, we're focusing on Texas. So
Yeah.
we have 8 partners now, and we've just announced working in Texas, and with the higher education institutions and a couple workforce boards. And they're working in partnership with local healthcare employers, mostly, to do a couple key things. We've got 2 big objectives with this project. And the first is to enable healthcare nursing students in particular to earn credit towards their clinical requirements, which of course are what nurses have to do before they actually get practicing bedside. They have to practice that work.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Earn credit for the clinical requirements through work. Right? Also, we wanted to identify and address policies and practices that are restricting nursing students' abilities to work while they're conducting their clinicals and of course and so it's really trying to, one, create new methods for working learners, because a lot of learners are indeed, right, to complete their requirements without having to quit their job. And to enable people to continue studying without needing to quit their jobs too, because we know that so many people, especially in Texas, have to support their families. They're working full time, trying to go to school at the same time, and people shouldn't need to choose between opportunity ahead of them and the necessity of right now. And so that's really what this project is all about.
Okay, this is fantastic. I mean, I love the setup here for the streamlining success. I love the fact that it's in Texas, and you're working with a lot of folks that I've probably bumped around with in my career. So, Jenny, let's get to you. You mentioned the Trellis Foundation has a mission of improving outcomes in higher education, and the problem you're looking to solve with streamlining success is how to connect this interest to the topic and your interest at the foundation with what is going on over there at Aspen.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. So as I mentioned, the foundation looks at holistic student needs and pathways, and we're really interested in adult learners. And I think that this particular question really intersects with all of those. So much of our work really is multifaceted. As we've talked about, and as I know you and your audience know well, students are juggling jobs, families, studies. And there are ways that colleges, universities, public agencies, private actors can help ensure that the structures of our education system acknowledge those competing priorities and allow for students to succeed while they're balancing all of them. And so we're always looking for ways that we can really accomplish that, help support students in that process and make sure that those structures are supporting them. So we've realized over the past several years and been focusing on the fact that several professions require extended unpaid practicum hours in order for students to complete their education, right? And so teachers, social workers, mental health practitioners, it's a significant pain point for students. And we were thinking about all of those and figure out, though, as a foundation, what's our lane? How could we help influence that? And so we wanted to hone in on one profession. And because of the great need for healthcare workers in Texas, this is something that the nation is working on. And because it seemed like there could be enough different types of levers that it could be interesting. Like we thought about mental health practitioners, but we weren't quite sure what some of the employer side dynamics might be, just because it's a completely different field. And so it seemed like, and Haley can help underscore this, right? How that this was the avenue that made sense for us to really look at. So the underlying question, the underlying pain point was, how do we address the fact that many students need to work full time to support themselves and possibly their families as well? And if they're engaging in unpaid work and paid work, it can be very, very difficult to find the time to balance that, right? So that was the pain point. We weren't necessarily thinking that the answer would be to provide a living wage as a stipend for students while they're doing a practicum. That's hard to sustain from private dollars, a foundation doesn't have enough funding long-term for that. But with that pain point, then we were curious, what would be the policy and practice levers that could be used to alleviate those competing pressures? And that was why we reached out to Haley.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, having worked in San Antonio, did a lot of work in healthcare, did a lot of the work with first time in college students. And I can just remember, I mean, the performance of an incoming first time in college, West Side San Antonio resident to reach their goal of being RN with single digits, really. I mean, that trajectory was so when we would do, our intake and stuff, it was always like, oh my gosh, how can we build a support system around that? And colleges can do only so much, so bringing in these kind of external supportive partners and framework with folks that have a lot of know-how in that area is huge. So I applaud the work that you're doing out there, because hearing from the employer side and the employer community in healthcare, it's just always just everybody's short, Yeah. And, the other thing I'd add to those kind of compounding factors I recall from students is all of a sudden it's doing shift work. You're going to do your practicums at night, and all of a sudden that just tosses all those things that you mentioned as kind of constraints or barriers up even to a higher relief for those individuals. So fantastic work. So when Haley, I want to turn it over to you and kind of get into like how did we do this work? So when you started at Trellis Foundation, you did a landscape assessment. And I want to hear a little bit about that, because some of our listeners may not know what that means. But a landscape assessment to determine what solutions might be out there for the problem the foundation identified. So what did the national landscape show about the creative approaches? What did you see out there that you kind of later distilled into what would be the Streamlining Success Initiative?
Sure. Well, it's such a joy when a funder comes with a clear idea that aligns so well with their mission, and then is really open to saying, I'm not sure about the tactics. What is the right way or the most opportunistic way to make this happen? And so that was really the spirit in which we entered this landscape analysis. So that was last year, which now feels like 100 years ago, but here we are. So we took a look at a couple things. One, just trying to pin down a bit of the supply demand issue, right? Like every other state in the nation, Texas has huge nursing shortages, and they're actually not scheduled to abate at any point in the near future. And they are incredibly acute in particular parts of the state, right? So we knew that demand was not going to be a problem. And we also saw that supply, meaning the number of students who were getting through programs, it was not going to be sufficient to even come close to meeting demand. So we needed to create a lever of one form or another to open up the pathways through post-secondary into licensure and then into practice. And so Trellis Foundation's focus on the clinicals as the sort of pain point, it's one pain point of a million. Let's just be honest. I mean, the pathway to get a healthcare credential, to get a nursing credential, is full of bottlenecks of all kinds. There's not enough faculty. There's not enough space inside of facilities. There's not enough clinical placements. So there's bottlenecks all over the place. And so as we were looking around, we looked at a variety of employer and institutional partnership solutions. The first one we really rejected. There's a lot of scholarships out there that say, give money to a learner to go through their clinicals and have some resources. But as Jenny mentioned, like the pure philanthropic resources can't support at the scale needed. So you could spend millions of dollars on hundreds of scholarships and still wind up tomorrow with the same pipeline problems you had today. So we rejected that. We found a lot of promise and blended in some approaches with work and learn models. A lot of employers, especially in Texas, are investing heavily in their incumbent workforce, taking folks from janitorial, custodial, food service, and frontline healthcare roles into nursing roles. And we found a lot of promise there. And then we also found some really interesting strategies around trying to break some of those bottlenecks. But it was in a couple places that I got very excited because, as Jenny talked about, this is about trying to figure out what could really work. And there are a couple conditions in Texas that actually make this project really cool and really appropriate for Texas.
Now you're speaking my love language.
Hey, I mean, when I can talk positively about Texas, I know, right? So a couple things. Nursing students in Texas are allowed to carry out tasks under supervision for which they've received classroom-based instruction, right? And so they're not allowed to practice out of license, but when they're not held only to, they're allowed to practice things as they acquire them, so long as the appropriate supervision is there. Number two, nursing students can work as unlicensed healthcare professionals outside of their roles as students. So they're able to, if you're going to school to be an RN, you are allowed to practice as a CNA or an LPN or in that other space. And so that is really fantastic. And then during the pandemic, the Board of Nursing created a really interesting policy that allowed nursing students to meet some of their clinical hour requirements in their degree plans through employment. And that was where we got kind of excited, because if we're thinking about lasting solutions, right, not just, enabling some students to get through now, but break bottlenecks well into the future, it's that combination. Create more capacity, yes, of course, but think about if students are already working and you have this really wonderful set of policies in your state, leverage it, try to get many more opportunities for students to get their clinical requirements met while they're working. So that was what our landscape analysis really led us to. And, that's how we arrived at our two big objectives, which are enabling that work-based learning and, clinical requirements through employment happen, and trying to address some of those bottlenecks that create the unnecessary restriction in the pipeline.
Well, it warms my heart to hear the Lone Star Solutions in the nursing framework here in Texas. And
well, guess what, Anson? That's just Texas. And I'm curious. I represent a lot of states across the U.S. And I'm wondering, is this a model can be used elsewhere? Like, are you really thinking about what scale could look like on this? And how about all the other places around the country that are facing the same challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a big TBD. We didn't do a 50-state analysis of all of the things that anybody could do. We did things that would apply really well in Texas because Trellis Foundation is a Texas funder. But what we really discovered was like I said, there's a couple things that make this work well. And so Texas is actually a state that does not prohibit students who are working through their clinicals from getting paid. There are some states that do that, right? So that's one barrier that if states are listening and thinking, well, how would I leverage something like this? Take a look at that policy. If there's a restriction against them getting paid in the first place, all bets are off. You can't do it. And then, like I said, this presence of this series of policies that are actually like enabling students to apply their learning as they go and get credit for what they're doing on the job. Those two things really open doors that not every state really has. So I'll encourage folks, go look at your Board of Nursing restrictions guidelines and check it out, because if those two doors are open, something like this could definitely work for you.
So I want to throw one in there for you. So I work with populations that are mostly have criminal histories. And I'm wondering how friendly is Texas when it comes to occupational licensing for nursing?
That is not a question, Jeffrey, I can answer off the top of my head. I wish I could.
I wasn't sure it was something that ever came up in this, because I know that both you and Jenny work with populations that have often faced criminal history challenges, and it's something that's often in my radar screen. But it is something that this is a good profession for both men and women coming out of prisons and jails, and where they really can give back to the community in those positions. And I think it's an amazing project. I also want to say that the reason adult learners, when they transition, don't succeed has really very little to do with them not being able to do the job. It has to do with all those other barriers that you both have talked about that get in the way as they go to try and find that career path. So it's wonderful what you're doing, because you're knocking down those barriers in a big way.
Well, we're going to try. we're definitely trying. Yes, and we're at the
They're
starting
at the starting line.
now.
Yeah, they've taken off. Hey, so let's go to Jenny. So let's hear from you. What was the foundation's interest in this two-prong approach, where you're focusing on both connecting that work-based learning piece, which we've been talking about, with the clinical hour requirements and removing barriers to completion?
Yeah, thank you. So I think we were excited to approach it through two different prongs. We were open and eager to that when it bubbled up through the landscape analysis, because we know that we don't know the answer yet, right? And regions in Texas are so different, and the needs of students are so different. And so by having different approaches that we're looking at and we're really diving into, that helps increase the odds of finding a mix of levers that together can be replicable and sustainable across different regions in the state. And so just really, really excited to not be pursuing just one line of thinking, but also looking at a couple of different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm excited, just, going back to that previous discussion, we were talking about like how other states can replicate this. I definitely think, and maybe this is something we can do at our lightning round at the end, but what are the, I want you guys to start thinking, what recommendations would you have to our listeners that are in other states that are saying, we need some of this, because, nursing shortages are ubiquitous. It's just everywhere. And oftentimes it is policy constraints that sometimes are pretty arcane. You have to really dig into state Board of Nursing rules and regulations and stuff to figure out why there's this particular constraint. So you guys think I'm going to charge you to start thinking about it now, and then in a few minutes in our lightning round, maybe you can charge our listeners with some recommendations that are out of state. So Haley, I'm going to come back to you. You announced the initial grantees just the other day. I mean, totally exciting. I'm glad you guys are thrilled about that. I was like, oh, here we go. Roller coaster is starting up, and they get some great excitement here in the state. But what does this group of implementation partners look like? Like, what kind of things will they be doing over the next several years?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it's less a roller coaster and more like an Autobahn. Like that.
There we go.
That would be the right metaphor, Anson. I would love that, but we will see. Because like I said, we're at the starting line, and we're especially anticipating. There's so much upheaval in the economy, and there are so many changes that are happening, and so we are going to be walking right alongside these grantees. In a learning community that Jen will talk about in a second, but also trying to support them as they're adapting. One of the really, I think, cool parts about this project is that they are, to a large degree, inventing, right? I mentioned this policy that allows, institutions and their employer partners to figure out ways of enabling students to get credit for their work-based learning, for their employment, for their clinicals. We were not really able to find a ton of examples of that work happening in real time on the ground. So we're not necessarily building on that lane from a huge amount of resources or templates or guides or strategy. And so a lot of what they're going to be doing, what all of the partners will be doing in the first year is like figuring that out, right? So the really cool thing is across our grantees, which you can read about in the press release, across the grantees, they're all coming to the table with employer partners. In some cases, many employer partners, depending on the size of the region. In our smaller communities, they're coming with their primary healthcare provider, their key partner in their training program.
Sure.
So that will be a big deal in year one. And what I'd expect at the end of year one is that we will have, actual agreements in place, right? Training plans and agreements in place that will govern these, these opportunities for students to get their clinicals covered in part by their employment. So that will be extremely cool. And then, as Jenny mentioned, because every region in Texas is a little different, actually, or a lot different, because Texas is so big, my Midwest brain cannot comprehend. The idea is they're each adapting and approaching the second strategy, which is about removing those barriers and practices in a different way. right? So they're building from strength in some cases. So taking an existing clinical placement platform where people can get sorted into, you know, their placement areas more quickly and expanding it into a new region. Or they're taking the opportunity to use simulation curriculum and equipment for training has grown immensely over the course of the pandemic. And so we've got a couple sites that are using simulation software and practices, which will be really cool, especially for far-flung and rural areas that don't have huge amounts of you know, real life placements to have. We've got some opportunities for, you know, we've got a couple of 4-year flagship institutions participating, and they're taking, you know, quite academic approach, and we'll do some level, you know, some research and analysis on, you know, how this is all shaping up. And I would expect to see publications in, you know, in major periodicals, and that will be very exciting too. So not to belabor anything, but the array of approaches on both sides of this will, I think, be really exciting for a couple reasons. One, because we've got community colleges, 4-year campuses, workforce development organizations, we're going to have an array of approaches because we have rural, urban, suburban sort of locations. We'll have these sorts of abilities to say, you know, it makes very, very little sense for a tiny community in the Rio Grande Valley to take up a thing that was developed at a 4-year flagship in Houston, right? It can be hard to wrap your brain around it, but because we'll have these sort of examples coming from a variety of places, we're hoping that makes ultimately a more intelligible array of solutions. And then I'm not going to steal Jenny's thunder. We're really excited, though, about the other activities we're going to be sort of developing over this year and then into the, you know, full grant implementation process around bringing folks together. So Jenny, I mean, maybe you can take up, you know, what is the learning community going to look like?
Sure. Yeah, no, we're really excited about that component. And I want to say, I know as we talk this through, we're really careful and intentional. We know that learning communities can be double-edged. It's more work, it's additional time. So we try to be cognizant of when it makes sense and when it doesn't. Because while we hear that it's more work, it's oftentimes like not necessarily paid for that amount of time that you're spending in it. But at the same time, when we have convenings and we have learning communities, our grant partners tell us that that was helpful, like that peer learning component and the ability to make space to have a convening, to meet with our team and other teams. It creates more creativity and more connections when we have that.
Could one of you kind of define the learning community? Some of our listeners, that might be kind of a jargon that we all love, but some listeners may not be exactly sure what we mean by learning community.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So it's taking the approach that instead of doing 8 separate grants, right, where each region is sort of doing their own thing, and Haley may be calling them up and giving them some advice on the side, right? Or maybe giving them advice like as each region, it's making sure that they also then come together for regularly scheduled cohort conversations, right? So in addition to the deep expertise that Haley's bringing in the guidance she's giving them, she and her team are giving them, they are also learning from each other. And the reason we thought that was that this was a particularly important topic to do that with is because we are experimenting and exploring and iterating. And in that kind of a topic, it's really helpful to bring folks together. So sometimes, you know, if you have established answers, right, if it's something that folks have figured out what really, really works, a lot of times they'll go to that coaching model, right, where you'll have an advanced and then and then emerging. But in this space, we don't know what the established answers are. We have some practices that may be working really well in some regions, but we don't necessarily have a body of work that we really can point to as the best practice in this. And so in a learning community, folks can be coming together with Haley and her colleague Chelsea and their team at UpSkill America and really brainstorming and iterating and sharing together so that when something didn't work, they can warn each other. And then when it does go well, they can share why they think it was. And that way they can assess whether it'll work in their region or not.
Oh, I think it's a great model, and I think Texas is a good place for that because you do have so many uh, uh, urban centers that actually have rural locations, and then you're going to have just pure rural, models that maybe have deeper expertise on that rural application of things. So I think it'll give you a great durability there in terms of like building that larger kind of research practice that you're trying to come out of this. I love the model. It sounds fantastic. So let's turn to kind of close this up by thinking about the outcomes you're dreaming of. You go to bed at night and you're like, okay, we've got this thing off the ground, the Autobahn, we're cruising, as Haley told us here. But what are the outcomes you're driving to 3 years from now? What kind of conversations do you hope you're having? And we're going to bring you back before 3 years for sure, because we want to hear a check-in on this. But please.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to fill in like a little bit this idea of the learning, the idea of the learning community too, is to try to orient this around the learning too, right? Outcomes are incredibly important, but because, like Jenny said, because we're sort of inventing, because there's so much to be developed here, the idea is we were going to be coming alongside and evaluating and conversing and understanding all the time, like, why didn't that work? What did work? What are the conditions involved in that working? What are the policy implications of this? And so it's not only what the actors, what the grantees will be doing together, it's sort of like the orientation of the project. And that, from my perspective, is so exciting. And it's so heartening to have funders come along and be partners in learning with you. Because it's necessary. We need to be inventing and innovating all the time. So kudos to the Trellis Foundation team. But so I will say, in terms of outcomes, what we hope and what we expect are that we will see movement in some key metrics, right? And that we will see more students being able to come into and persist through and complete nursing programs because of the structural and policy changes that partners will be making. We're hoping that many more students, of course, acquire credit toward their clinicals through employment, because that's the point, right? And we also hope that these things happen disproportionately to learners who are the most marginalized, right? And if those three sort of things happen in those metrics, then I think we will be successful. And the things that underpin those are, we're hoping down the road for greater understanding on the part of not just the 8 partners we're working with right now, but of many, many other post-secondary institutions and employer partners, that this policy exists and that there are strategies to implement it, that there's evidence that it works and here's how it can work, and that ultimately we're thinking systemically. So we're not coming back in 3 years, 5 years, still wondering, well, how do we solve that problem of unpaid clinicals? Right? We will have, hopefully, at the end of 3 years, a solution set that is clear, that is streamlined, that is case made. And then in 5 years, 10 years, we will see dramatic impacts in the pipeline for nursing and nursing employment. So that's my dream. Like every other nerd, I do sit in bed and wonder, like,
you know what, though, Haley? Right? Haley, this is just nursing. Just imagine all the other industry sectors in the country that if they took this approach, how much they'd be able to learn. And from the grantee end, it's wonderful because it gives you a chance to experiment and to not worry about failing so much, but really figuring out what really works and what best practices look like. So it's a great project and something that hopefully, not only in nursing around the country, but we could look at modeling in other industry sectors where we're really are short of people.
Yeah. And I will say, if you can do it in nursing, you can do it in other occupations, because there's very, very few that have more restrictions and guidelines than nurses. Rightfully so. And,
absolutely. Well, Jenny, how about you? What's your dream here for 3 years and interim, conversations that you want to be having as the project gets underway?
Yeah, I have to say, part of why we're working so well together, our two organizations, is we have very similar approaches and goals. I would reiterate, right? 3 years from now, hopefully we have that bench of possible practices that I mentioned that we don't currently have.
Yeah.
A menu of structural levers that one can bring in to employ to ensure that their healthcare pipeline students have a clear pathway to both graduation and to employment that allows them to successfully both study and complete those clinical hours while also providing for themselves financially.
Awesome. Hey, Ants, why don't we hit the lightning round, and then I'd love to hear some takeaways. So we're giving you a prep right here. Start thinking about that lightning bolt. What do you want people to leave with after they get done this podcast? We're going to take a really quick break, but we're going to be right back. We're back. The lightning round. Here we go.
I didn't realize it was going to be so literal, you guys.
Oh yeah, it's literal.
That was great.
Actually, we sometimes actually have lightning bolts that actually strike our guests if they give a bad answer. So we're not going to do that tonight. You're good.
Hey, I want to begin.
Right.
And my charge to the listeners out there is, first off, if you're at a Texas community college or the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board or a healthcare provider in Texas, watch this model. I've been in countless meetings on healthcare and nursing in Texas over 20-something years. And one thing I always pick up is there's a lot of peer jockeying. People want to be the best, which is great. We got 50 community colleges that are all looking for the next big answers and how to innovate. We've got massive healthcare systems. We've got lots of rural healthcare systems. And I think looking at a model like this is something that's going to really get people excited. So I think the momentum is going to be huge. So if you're listening and you know somebody at one of those institutions that's engaged, share the podcast with them because and stay tuned with the press release, which we'll put in the show notes here. So absolutely, that's my charge to the audience out there. And I'm going to kick it over to Haley. Why don't you let us know what your charge to our audience is?
Sure. I always struggle to restrain myself. Not 50 things that you should do, but 1 or 2 things that you should do. If I was talking to a post-secondary provider, a nursing department, I would say, don't wait to be in touch with your healthcare partner, with your employer partner, to understand and explore everything they're doing to increase the pipeline from their perspective. Healthcare employers they are funding, they are apprenticing, they are doing everything under the sun to try to find people and get them into the roles that they need to fill. And in many ways, they are suffering under the same sort of, restrictive environment and blockades and barriers as higher ed. And sometimes they just don't talk. And I think one of the coolest things we've seen so far, and again, we are just at the starting line, but we've talked with every single one of these grantees and partners, is they've got a healthcare employer at the table, and the healthcare employers are really excited about the work because they are going to benefit too. That's right. Yep. When I will go to my grave, when education, employer-supported education done right happens, everybody gets to win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jenny, how about you?
Yeah, I would say that what I have learned so far in this process is actually not only applicable in this topic of healthcare pipelines, but I think is a good thing is to be reminded as a funder, and it also would apply to employers and higher ed, which is don't be limited by your initial pain point or question when you're thinking about your solution set. I really loved being challenged that, yes, we see what you think the problem is, but let's step back, be broader so we can be creative and getting a solution that gets to where you're trying to go, right? Sometimes you think the problem is this, but what you really need to focus on is where you're trying to get, because it may be a completely different problem you're going to end up solving to still just get to that outcome.
Right.
So.
Right. I love it. I love it. Jeff, how about you? What's your charge?
So for my charge is that the lesson I get from all of this is it takes a village. Like you cannot do this alone. This takes funders, this takes employers, this takes training partners, this takes our Aspen Institute. This takes everyone out there to kind of come together and to really dig down and handle and ask those tough questions. Like what can make this work and how do we come up with reasonable solutions? And my charge to everybody is to come together and to look at other industry sectors where this model could really work and then start considering of how we can do it and start testing the waters and just reach out to Jenny and Haley if you need some guidance. And I'm sure they'll give you some suggestions on how to kick it off. We're looking forward to the results of all this and especially your launch. I know you got a big announcement coming up. We'll make sure we post that as well. And congratulations to all the grantees. We wish them well. And we really want to hear your data in about a year from now. And we want to hear how well you did. And I'll make you a pledge. Since it's in Texas, that I will travel to Texas and I will come to see Anson and we will do a live remote and with some of your students and see how they fared. How's that?
I love that.
Love it.
I would love that. Okay. But since some people are probably listening in their car, could you guys tell our audience how they can find you? Because they may not read the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at upskillamerica.org. Would love if you visited there. And you can also find us on LinkedIn, Upskill America. And my name is Haley Glover.
All right. Jenny.
Trellisfoundation.org is our website. Trellis, like the thing plants climb up, trellisfoundation.org. And we are also on LinkedIn. And my name is Jenny Achilles.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't just put Trellis like I did and I get all these great things from my home and garden center. So fantastic. Trellis Foundation. We are so happy. You guys are fantastic. It's a great project. I think the location's ideal. You're going to get a lot of good feedback and diversity in what you're going to do in terms of your project design. And I wish y'all best of luck. And we're going to bring you back because we need to hear some interim steps along this because that's what people want to hear is how did this thing get going once it gets going. So congratulations to you on the project and best of luck.
Thanks, Anson.
Thanks, everybody. You've been listening to Behind Every Employer podcast with sponsored by COABE. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to Behind Every Employer with Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. If you like the show, please follow us and tell your friends and colleagues. This broadcast has been brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education. You can find us at www.coabe.org. You can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube, or on your favorite podcast site. If you'd like to be a guest on Behind Every Employer, please contact us at behindeveryemployer@coabe.org.